Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee. But he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all, the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. Can say amen? Amen. Amen again. Amen. By a show of hands, does anyone here have psychic powers? Well, yes. I love it. Psychic powers. You can read energy. I'm actually surprised that Miriam did not raise her hand. Because I think she has psychic powers. She can read the energy. Sometimes, without even saying a word, I can enter the house. She looks at me and says, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "How did you know?" And sometimes even Grayson, he gets into the car and Miriam says, "Something is up." Just reading the energy, being able to tell before anybody says anything that the energy is right or the energy is not so right. Those who study these things, they tell us that the words that we use are only a tiny percentage of the message that we bring. Even before we begin to say anything, we have said a lot. Isn't it scary? And when we are in relationship with somebody, they can read us from a distance. In fact, I ask this, is anybody psychic here? I think I'm also a little bit psychic. And that's psychic powers. I remember when I was in minor seminary, the rector, the headmaster, would walk into the dining room. And just by the way he walked in the dining room, we would tell, somebody's in trouble. And we figured out if Father walked into the dining room with his priestly collar to the side, somebody done messed up. If he walks in with a breviary and his collar is full and he's greeting the kids as he's going, everything is fine. And so we began to read the energy even before Father Rector ever said anything. Now, hold on to that thought. That thought of reading your loved one, reading the people you are in relationship with, even before they say a word. Hold on to that. Let's go to the gospel. Now this gospel passage will sound like a broken record in the next 4-5 weeks, because we are reading from chapter 8 to chapter 12, which is the shadow of the cross. Now, again, a little bit of history. It's a gospel passage written by John Mark, a disciple of Peter, between the ages 67 AD to 73 AD. It is a very interesting gospel because it is a gospel that doesn't have one strong theological stance. It doesn't lean one way or the other. For example, the Gospel of Matthew leans very much into the Jewish culture. It is a gospel that is written for the Jewish Christian community. The Gospel of Luke was written for the Gentile Christian community. We used to say about the Gospel of Mark that it is the poor cousin of the Gospels because it really doesn't lean one way or the other. But that was a mistake because the The method that we use in studying the Gospel of Mark is called narrative criticism. That means we let the narrative tell us its own theology. Now, we looked at this before. Mark begins by saying, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. And everything he says in the Gospel is to prove that very first line. It is a Gospel of response. There are at least 3 predictable responses to this Gospel. Look very closely to it. The first response is from the Pharisees and the scribes. Whenever the Pharisees and the scribes show up on a scene in the Gospel of Mark, they are always almost opposed to the message of Jesus. Whenever they show up, they are the ones who are screaming, "Boo!" They have a very predictable response. Their response is, we are opposed to this message that Jesus Christ from Nazareth is Son of God. Then we have the crowd. The crowd also has a predictable response. Mark almost sets up like a pattern age to his gospel. The crowd is always amazed at what Jesus does. Whenever they show up as a group, the crowd will say, "Oh my gosh, he does everything so well. We have never seen anything like." They are always surprised. And we have the disciples. The disciples, when they show up in the Gospel of Mark, as a group, they are always confused. Always. They are not understanding, they are shocked, they scratch their heads, they say, "We don't understand, can you explain?" Then he takes them to the side, explains something to them, but the disciples, as a group, they always don't get it. There is a fourth group that Mark doesn't point out. That fourth group is the reader. And Mark asks the question, now, how would you respond to this? So Mark invites us as well to respond, saying to us, being opposed to the message of Jesus all the time is not the appropriate response. Being amazed all the time is not really an appropriate response. Being shocked all the time or disturbed, not understanding all the time is not an appropriate response. What is the appropriate response to the message of Jesus? Now the disciples are having a hard time since last week. Remember, last week, Jesus sets his eyes like flint and he's heading towards Jerusalem. As he's heading towards Jerusalem, he tells his disciples that the Son of Man will be arrested and he will be put to death. This is something that the disciples are not prepared to listen, to hear. Now, when we read the scriptures, it is as if Jesus is telling the disciples, "Hey, FYI, I'm going to Jerusalem and things are not going to turn out well there." No. That is a very artificial reading of the scriptures. Because long before, Jesus tells the disciples for the first time that he is troubled by something. His body is already telling those who are paying attention what is going on. Long before, Jesus says to the disciples, "I am going to Jerusalem and I will be arrested." They should have known something is up. Amen? If they had paid attention to the energy around Jesus, they should have known. And yes, maybe they were having difficulty with it. That's okay. But Jesus did not say something is going to go wrong. If you know him, if you are around him, you can tell the energy is different. Then today, he takes the disciples again, and told the disciples again, and hey, just in case you didn't hear me the first time, I'm going to Jerusalem and I'll be put to death. In fact, before he does that, he takes 3 of his disciples. We skip over this event. He takes 3 of his disciples up the mountain of transfiguration. He is transfigured before them. That means his clothes become dazzling white. Not to show the disciples that he can talk with Elijah and Moses, but to show them something. That although his life is spiraling out of control, God is still in control. Amen? That sometimes when things don't seem to be adding up, these things don't seem to be making sense, everything is spiraling out of control, we might think that God has abandoned us. He shows them at the Mount of Transfiguration that God is still in control. Today, he tells them again, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to suffer many things. This is not just by the way. Jesus is going through the suffering right now. What is their response? Their response is, hey, who amongst us is the greatest? If you were Jesus, you would wonder and say, exactly, where is that coming from? Did anybody hear a thing I said? Maybe you have been in a company of somebody like that. You go over to them and you are pouring your heart out to them, and the next thing out of their mouth has absolutely nothing to do with what you are talking about. And you are thinking, I just wasted my time. Amen? Anybody, does this familiar? It's like, there is a crisis of listening because we are so preoccupied with our own stuff that are going on that we do not listen to somebody out there who is pouring out their hearts. Today we are invited as a Christian community to learn once again how to listen. May we not be that kind of Christian community when somebody comes to us and they are telling us, oh, I'm going through a divorce and this, and you should, I had cake last night. Why? We have a friend, actually, a neighbor who is actually very good. She's a very good listener. We can be talking about homework and all that thing, and everybody else moves on. She will bring you back. Now, you talked about homework, but you tried this or you tried that. She listens to everything you say. That is an aspect of discipleship. One who listens and is there and pays attention. Now, we have to ask ourselves in this meditation, what is the one thing that seems to deactivate my listening skills? What is my obsession? For example, the obsession of the disciples was who amongst us is the greatest. In thinking who amongst us is the greatest, they missed the very thing that was right before their eyes, somebody agonizing about their child. Amen? Amen. Recently, I was studying for the lieutenant test. It was the only thing that mattered. I mean, the house was a mess. Dishes in the dishwasher, in the sink. I am not seeing anything. I was focused on that lieutenant test. I am going to get that lieutenant test. I wonder, what else did I miss? Right before my eyes, there's a 12-year-old who's growing up rather fast. But because I am so obsessed about this one thing, I miss everything. An invitation to come back and rearrange things in our lives so that we become sensitive to the promptings of the Spirit, so that we see the pain or whatever somebody who is close to us is going through. And sometimes our obsession would be getting that job, getting this weight, getting looking like this. Whatever it is, let us use perspective. Amen? Now let's go back to that psychic thing. Are you a psychic? Can you read energy? That's good. That's where our calling is. To read the energy. Not sometimes even to read the energy, but simply to be present. So when I ask, how are you doing? I don't go off on a tangent and talk about how great a vacation I had before I listen to the story. And that is how we grow Christian growth. unity. That is the call that I feel that we are invited into this gospel passage. One little thing about children. Today Jesus takes a child and places the child in front of the disciples. Have you noticed how children pay attention? Sometimes quite shocking. Because a child will come up and look at an adult sometimes who is going through a rough time and says, "You look sad." Or, "You look happy." Or, "What's wrong?" That child is paying attention to what the adults are not. To be the people of the kingdom, we have to capture that spirit of the child that is in